My name is Carla Denyer. I'm Vice-Chancellor and Warden of Durham University, and it's a real pleasure to be here today and to welcome back to Durham our very distinguished alum Carla Denyer, who did a degree in mechanical engineering here at Durham some time ago, and was at St Chad's College as well as in the engineering department, and who also contributed greatly to the honour of Durham University by being part of the alumni team, who aced it in the Alumni University, most recent University Challenge, which we all followed intensely and tried to shout out the answers to the questions, but no chance, Carla. It was absolutely awesome. So thank you, and thank you for flying such a public flag for how distinguished and good our alumni can be in the public domain. So in a short while, I'll be introducing Andrew Crossland, who will introduce Carla's lecture, but I'll just say a little bit about Durham University and sustainability, because as everybody knows, we're here, hosted by the Durham Energy Institute, and we have a long-standing, going back to the mid-19th century, deep, profound research interest in climate change, and how we can mitigate the negative effects of climate change and contribute to biodiversity, regeneration and renewal. We are and remain extremely committed to this research and teaching agenda. We were placed 22nd in the QS Sustainability Global Rankings, and we were very delighted only 2 weeks ago to host a huge gathering of old and perfectly formed European universities, the Coimbra Group, 40 universities from all over Europe to which we belong, for a climate conference that we had here at the business school last couple of weeks ago. And all of those universities, bar one, signed up to something we call the Durham Declaration, which affirms and extends our commitment as universities educating over 1.5 million students across Europe to research, teaching and campus management for a more sustainable future and for biodiversity gain. So we have, internally in the university, we have ambitious targets around biodiversity net gain and net zero, and we were highly commended in the International Green Gown Awards for our biodiversity strategy. And as we build each new building, including Bolton House, the latest building that we've been refurbishing and opening this month, we look very profoundly at carbon reducing measures, and I'm very proud of this. We have platinum level hedgehog friendly campus status, and I'm very disappointed the hedgehogs never seem to appear when I go walking. It's mainly rabbits, but nevertheless, we think of all of our furry and not so furry friends on the campus. We're officially opening the other business school building down by the waterside on Monday. And the guest speaker who is going to be doing that opening, we've chosen very carefully, is Paul Polman, who is the former CEO of Unilever, and very well known actually for his commitment to business and sustainability and to addressing the deleterious effects of the climate emergency. He's recently written a book called Net Positive: How Courageous Corporations Thrive by Giving Back More Than They Take. And I hope that he will be setting the direction for our business school on Monday and affirming what we need to do in the near future. We're here with the DEI, who are very important to us at Durham at supporting our common climate goals through transforming energy systems to be clean and fair. The DEI informs research and policy at all levels, has a co-director with the policy remit, and will soon publish a paper on mine water heat, and is leading active research on energy vulnerability, equalities, and many other things beside. And we're very proud of our Energy Institute. I would like now to introduce an advisory board member of the Energy Institute, Dr. Andrew Crossland, who is a professor of practice here at Durham, a Durham alum, a low carbon energy specialist who runs the energy tracking service MyGrid GB. Andrew, please come and take the stage and introduce our speaker, and thank you for being on our advisory board.
Hello everyone. It's a real honour to be here and to introduce Carla. I do have to do a little bit of advertising about the DEI, but I hope you know it will be very relevant to Carla being here today. And just welcome as well to the Vice-Chancellor as well for that amazing introduction. So the Durham University Energy Institute, well, I kind of pinch myself when you're part of it and look around. We do research in fusion, wind, solar, smart grids, business, law, history, even let English literature people get involved, and politics, and all really focused on probably the greatest challenge of our time. My motivation, and I think that of all of my colleagues, is that, according to Peter Wadhams anyway, if we carry on the way we are, by 2035 there will be no ice sheet in the Arctic Circle. The clock is ticking. We're all really very motivated to move things really quickly and really to build the people who can help solve the climate challenge. So how can the DEI help? And I think this summary really speaks well to what the DEI does, and I think why Carla would be a great speaker today, is that we don't really think what's the next breakthrough in solar panels or do some amazing research on smart grids or try and solve fusion. What we're pretty able to do is do what I think is having the outcome unknown but both certain at the same time. Sometimes we're able to just ask a question and not know any idea what the answer might be, we just know it might be useful. And that was certainly something that, in my PhD, convincing someone in Liverpool to let me look at 10 cables revealed about £100 million of savings across the whole of the Northwest. We don't know what we're going to find out until we start asking those questions. And the DEI creates a really, really great environment for people to really enable people, to really nurture them, and to really trust people to develop something really exciting. And it's on that note, why my notes are sticking together, it's on that note that probably as altruists, I would say, the people who are involved in the DEI are really able to survive. And I would ask anyone here today, you've all followed the DEI, that's why you've all got the invite and been able to be here, to spread the word about it and get more people to follow it and get more people at amazing events like this. So yeah, I think people who've been shaped by Durham, I think Carla's a pretty exemplary person in that list. And I've done a little bit of a history. I have edited things out because I know Carla's going to mention some of these. But 20 years ago, we started our engineering degree. Carla was both the best and worst scoring person at Chowns in engineering. Well, I think you were the only person there, I think, in your first year.
I was,
yes. Yeah. That's how that happened. We've gone on, we designed some hydroelectric turbines together. You've won awards while you were here. But since then, of course, you've gone off and done some pretty amazing things. And if we think about it, you left Durham, you worked in wind farms, you became a Bristol Councillor, became leader of the Green Party, now an MP for Bristol Central. Is a pretty amazing set of achievements. The one achievement you might not realise is the first lecture my mum has ever attended at Durham University. So well done, that's probably a gold star there. But yeah, without further ado, Carla Denyer, everyone.
Oh, thank you. Oh, hello. There we go. Thank you, both of you, for that lovely introduction. And on University Challenge, yes, apologies for causing you all to shout at the screen. After it was broadcast, I got a very annoyed message from WhatsApp message from one of my friends saying, "The Pixies, Carla, it's the Pixies. Why do you not know this?" But yeah, that was a lot of fun, and I was really pleased to be able to represent Durham on an all-women team as well, which is pretty nice. And against another all-women team, which all gave us a sense of relief in the first round that even if we failed, we were not letting down half of humanity in the process. So thank you very much for having me, everyone, and for coming along to this. I really appreciate it. I've been asked to speak a bit about my experience in Durham, how it's shaped me, and then what I've gone on to do since then, and then I'll get specific on some of the work that I'm doing now as an MP. I'm afraid, apologies to the alumni office, it's probably not a simple, straightforward A to B line from you go to Durham University and then you become an MP, so you can't quite put that on the website. But looking back as I was asked to, I can see a lot of valuable experiences that I had here that shaped me for sure. So certainly while I was here at Durham, I became more aware of the global and local and national issues that I chose to get involved in. And it was at Durham that I had my epiphany of sorts about climate change not just being an issue, but being the biggest issue facing humanity, and something that as soon as I realised that it wasn't even a decision, it was self-evident that I needed to dedicate my life to fixing it. But to be fair, that was a process that started before I came here. I was a campaigner in my sixth form college as well, campaigning on peace, human rights, workers' rights, campaigning for on the Make Trade Fair campaign before fair trade was really a proper thing. It was at Durham, though, that I had my first experience of getting elected, because I was elected as the environment rep on St Chad's JCR, and I used that role to get St Chad's to provide recycling facilities for its students, because incredibly, in 2007, there were no recycling bins that the students could access in the college, and I don't think we were even the only college that was in that situation. So it's good to hear that university is making more progress on sustainability than it was when I was here. And in fact, as Andrew hinted, I ended up receiving an award for my work with that, because I guess that was one of my early experiences that campaigning works, but also don't take the first no for a final answer. And I achieved it by doing the research into how much cheaper it is to get your recycling collected than waste that goes to landfill, and so I was able to make a financial case to the Bursar for why it was a no-brainer on several fronts. It was also at Durham that I met people from, frankly, a much wider variety of backgrounds than I had met before. So I grew up mostly in the southeast of England. I was state schooled throughout my education, but admittedly in a fairly middle-class area. So until I came to Durham, the vast majority of the people I knew were southern, mostly middle-class, mostly white, very suburban. And so coming to Durham, and in Chowns Bar, I got to know people from a much wider variety of backgrounds who lived in northern towns and cities that I had heard of but never had any occasion to visit, and also got to know people with very privileged lifestyles, to be honest. I remember the day that I sat down in Chowns Bar and found out that the person I was sitting next to had been to Eton. I nearly fell off my stool. So that's certainly broadened my horizons and got an idea of how other people's experiences have shaped them too. It was also at Durham that I first encountered the Quakers. So I wasn't brought up religious, but through the campaigning I was doing on peace and climate and human rights, I met a number of individuals who, it turns out, several of them were Quakers. And in fact, some of the activists who I most respected in the way that they worked and having integrity in the way that they campaigned were all Quakers, and that made me think, oh, maybe there's something in this. And so I attended my first Quaker meeting here in Durham, and later got very active in Quakers, including being part of a group called the Politically Engaged Young Friends, who successfully lobbied Quakers in Britain to become the first religious organisation in the UK to divest from fossil fuels. I'm a bit of a lapsed Quaker at the moment, but it's another part of my Durham experience that then went on to shape me. It's also, frankly, and those of you in the room that are engineers will probably recognise this, it was in Durham that I finally got to understand what engineering actually is, because when I was doing my GCSEs there was no such thing as a GCSE in engineering, although there now is. There's still no such thing as an A-level in engineering. And so it was a bit hard to grasp what it was exactly until I started doing it, beyond being told that I'd probably be good at it because I was good at physics. So that was obviously, as somebody that then went into engineering, a really important part of the experience. And in particular, I don't know if the undergrad programme here still involves the PAP trip, but that, yes, I'm getting a nod. So the PAP trip for folks that aren't engineers is you spend a week or two learning practical skills like how to use a lathe, how to assemble scaffolding, how to weld, which I had never had the opportunity to do those things before and probably wouldn't have done, having gone into an engineering consultancy afterwards rather than working on the front line. And that remains hugely valuable for me in understanding that when you design something, you have to design to actually be made by someone, and not just a CAD drawing. So that was very useful. It also created a wonderful interaction on Twitter way back in the early days when I was just a councillor, where a Conservative MP posed on some kind of industrial visit to a factory welding with his mask up. And he got flooded with replies saying, what the hell are you doing? You're going to make yourself blind. And then someone happened to know that there are several engineers and scientists in high-profile roles in the Green Party, and so there ensued a thread of people tagging in all of the female politicians in the Green Party who know how to weld. And I was like, and I got tagged in, and I was like, I've done it once on a trip in first year, I think that probably doesn't count. But yeah, there's several other former leaders and London Assembly members and councillors in the Greens who are civil engineers and who can actually weld. And Sian, my fellow MP, is a metallurgist. So yeah, I had a bit of fun with that. Incidentally, and I don't intend to make this a topic of my talk beyond mentioning it briefly, but in terms of my experience at Durham and what I took from it, I do want to briefly register my concern with the proposed 20 million cuts to the staffing budget here. I know that that's going to affect predominantly not the academic staff, but try doing an engineering degree without having lab technicians, good library staff, all of that stuff, not just the lecturers. So I do worry a little bit about the future of the course if those cuts go ahead, but I'll park that for now. So I'll briefly give you an extremely quick rundown of what I did when I worked in engineering. So I worked as an engineer in the renewable energy sector for about 6 years between graduating and then becoming a full-time politician. So yes, did mechanical engineering here at Durham. Briefly worked at Parsons Brinckerhoff, PB Power in Newcastle in a summer between my third and fourth years. Interestingly, one of the projects I did working in the wind team there was a bit of research, and I cannot remember who it was for, but it was, I don't remember if it was a government department or private, but it was looking at the different ports in the northeast for their suitability for retooling to offshore wind. I'm sad to say that whoever it was that commissioned that report didn't act on it very much. And the North East went on to unfortunately miss out on some opportunities to be the place where a lot of those huge offshore wind farms in the North Sea are manufactured. But yeah, so it's been that sort of the political, let's make sure this works for people, not just that we generate the right number of gigawatts, has always been quite a big part of my career. I then probably would have stayed in the North East because I was going to get an offer to work there after I graduated, but unfortunately for the Parsons Brinckerhoff Newcastle team, because they're an American company, the financial crash of 2008 meant that their American owners put a global recruitment freeze, even though business here was going swimmingly. My former boss at the time told me that my job offer was virtually on its way out of the printer when they put on the recruitment freeze, so I didn't end up taking the job there. Instead, I applied for and got a job working for Garrett Hassan, as they then were, now part of DNV, down in Bristol. And so that was what took me to Bristol. So a bit of a sliding doors moment there. If they'd got that out the printer slightly quicker, then I might well have stayed up here. I think that's what I wanted to do at the time. But Bristol is now my home, which I very much love, and it very much, I think, suits my attitude and approach in life. Bristol's quite a rebellious city that does a lot of doing things first and doing things differently and challenging other people to catch up. So I moved to Bristol in 2009, worked for Garrett Hassan for just under 6 years, initially in the offshore wind team, and in fact it's rather pleasing. So I was working on offshore wind farms in the very early stages when either the developer or a bank considering lending to them wanted an estimate of how much energy it could generate and what the uncertainty was on that, so that they could figure out what the loan looked like, or sometimes helping them to design the layout of the wind farm to maximise yield. And so many of those projects that I was working on sort of 12 to 15 years ago are now generating, or at least are being built. In fact, about this time last year, Rishi Sunak started talking about all of the offshore wind farms that we had built. And his favourite example were the ones on Dogger Bank, which I actually helped do the layouts for, which I don't believe he did. So that's lovely to see, especially when you always work in the early stages of things, to see things actually up and turning and generating energy. Also worked later on a lot of smaller onshore projects, across the world, not just in the UK. I worked on an EU-funded research project called Norse Wind, which was about modelling wind resource across the North Sea with a view to the next generation and the generation after of expansion of offshore winds. And I also dabbled in science communication and developed a game to help explain how wind farms are designed. But throughout all of that time, it became increasingly obvious to me, working in the engineering sector in renewables, that the barriers to rolling out renewables quickly were not predominantly technical. Of course, there are some technical challenges to solve, but it was very obvious to me that the real barriers was the policies and the political will of the people in charge to make the right decisions. And so, as you've heard, I've always been a campaigner alongside being an engineer since sixth form, so I was in my spare time in Bristol campaigning on climate and other issues. And frankly, getting a bit fed up of writing to my elected representatives and asking them to do the right thing and vote the right way on every individual vote that came up in Parliament. And so by chance I met some members of the Green Party through one of the issue campaigns I was involved in, and that was the point at which I realised, oh okay, this is a party that actually organises itself quite differently. The Green Party is quite much more grassroots and non-hierarchical compared to the other parties, which appealed to me as something that I wanted to be part of. And I realised that even though, especially back then in 2011, getting Greens elected is very difficult, there's a lot of ways in which our electoral system is stacked up to make that hard, I decided that would be less work in the long run than writing to MPs from other parties for the rest of my life, asking them to do the right thing on every individual vote. So I joined the Green Party in 2011, with no intention of being a politician myself, let alone the leader of it, just wanting to contribute with a bit of my spare time and my membership fees, my contribution financially. But I'm the kind of person that finds it hard to say no when asked to do things. So I got more and more involved, and then in 2015 I got persuaded to stand for election as a councillor. Wasn't sure if it was really for me, said no about half a dozen times before I said yes, which is part of why I now take it very seriously whenever I meet people from underrepresented backgrounds in politics, women, people of colour, disabled people, to if I see that they've got potential and would be good, to tell them and to not take the first no for an answer, because I know that that's what it took for me. And then 9 years to cut a long story short, 9 years as a councillor. I've been co-leader of the party now for 3.5 years and was elected for the first time as an MP in July this year as one of the 4 new Green MPs. So in that role as an MP, with the 4 of us in place now, we split the topics, the work of government between us, of course, as you'd expect. Much better situation than it was when it was just Caroline Lucas, when she had to be the shadow cabinet member for everything. But we still have to be the shadow cabinet member for 6 to 8 things each. So I am the lead for the Green MPs on energy and net zero, but also immigration, private rented sector for housing, women equalities and science and technology, plus the Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland office, and shadowing the work of the Prime Minister and the Deputy Prime Minister. So just that. Obviously I'm here predominantly in my role with the energy and net zero work. And I've taken part in a lot of debates, asking questions of ministers and encouraging often the government to go further on some areas. I've co-proposed 2 bills in this area. One was the Sunshine Bill, which was saying that all new homes should have solar panels, which I think, or suitable homes, which I think is a no-brainer and is certainly something that a lot of people often contact me to say, why isn't this already a thing? And all I can say is I agree. And I also co-proposed the Climate and Nature Bill, which was aiming to be a groundbreaking piece of legislation, basically taking on the mantle from the Climate Change Act 2008, which itself was groundbreaking in its time, but actually is based on science, which is pretty out of date now. And so the Climate and Nature Bill was aiming to update the targets, and make sure that we tackle climate and nature as one, rather than sort of treating them in silos and risking accidentally putting forward solutions that benefit one at the expense of the other. Unfortunately, well, that's a whole other story. If you're curious, you can ask me about it in the questions, but the Climate and Nature Bill did not go forward to a vote despite my best efforts, so that is basically in the long grass forever now. That's a whole other story. But in the last few weeks, that was a few months ago, in the last few weeks I've been looking closely at the government's Clean Power Plan, so I'm going to go into that in a bit more detail with you now. I have to say that in general, in my time as an MP since July, when you look at economic policy, social security, child poverty and so on, it can feel depressingly as though this government is not making a particularly strong break from the last government that we had for the previous 14 years. However, to be fair, it does look as though it is very serious about massively scaling up renewable energy. And that's something, of course, we can all be thankful for, and it's something that I and the Greens have been pushing for many years. The scale of the government's Clean Power Plan is really to be applauded. Decarbonising the whole grid by 2030 is a massive task, but the experts say that it is achievable. And I and my Green colleagues absolutely support the plans for that. It's the headlines, I don't expect most of you, if any of you, to have read it, are to triple offshore wind, triple solar power and double onshore wind by 2030. And of course, in order to achieve that, there needs to be a lot of work on grid connections, and there also needs to be work beyond 2030 as well, of course. One of the things I'm most concerned about is storage and flexible capacity, which remains a major challenge for decarbonising. So at the moment, most of the UK's long duration flexible capacity is coming from unabated gas generation. And that will, unfortunately, be the case right up to 2030 because previous governments simply haven't made the investment that was needed in rolling out alternatives. But one of the promising ones for that, and there are several, I think is tidal power. Now, the Severn Estuary Commission recently released a report looking at the potential of generating tidal power in the Severn Estuary. You'll know that that's right next to Bristol, so I've got an interest in that. And that has said that, as incidentally have the last 10 or 12 reports into the potential for generating tidal energy from the Severn Estuary, which come out every 10 or 15 years for the last century or so, has said that tidal generation in the Severn Estuary could generate up to 7% of the UK's electricity needs in one fell swoop. So it is a cause of frustration for many that hasn't happened yet. And sadly, tidal range power doesn't get a look in the Clean Power Plan. It's just not mentioned at all. There is a brief mention of tidal stream power, so that's where you have a turbine on the seabed, and that works well for a location like between two islands where the tidal stream gets funneled through a narrow gap and goes very fast. But tidal range, i.e. lower speed but a very high volume of water, which is best captured by a barrage or a lagoon, which is the situation in the Severn Estuary and in the Mersey, no mention of it in the Clean Power Plan at all. So the Severn Estuary Commission has recommended not a barrage because of the ecological as well as governance impacts of that, but one or more lagoons, which have a lower ecological impact but still the potential to generate a lot of energy. There's also a huge potential for a sort of scientific and engineering learning in that, because that would be the first such lagoons in the world. Obviously, a lot of opportunities for jobs as well. So that's something I'm very exercised by, and I'm going to be writing to the Secretary of State about that in particular in the next week or two. On the other hand, in the Clean Power Plan, I really want to see a clear distinction from the government that biomass won't form a significant proportion of the energy mix. Now, quite rightly, it's no longer classified as a form of clean power, which it used to be, but at the same time as that, the government announced continuing subsidies for Drax Power Station, which is the largest single emitter of carbon dioxide in the UK. And those subsidies, government subsidies, are going to keep propping up Drax until 2031. Now, I've been aware and concerned about the environmental harm of biomass for a long time. It's actually part of the reason why my degree is in mechanical engineering and not renewable energy, because the difference in terms of the modules you choose in order to be eligible for each of those in the engineering department was to get the renewable energy degree, you had to do a module in biomass, which I didn't want to do because I didn't think that was proper renewables. So yeah, this is an issue that's been well understood, obviously not just by me, by lots of people for over 15 years, and I want to make sure that the government understands it as well. And although there's so much good stuff in the Clean Power Plan, it still misses a really key point, which is that the cheapest and cleanest electricity is the electricity that you don't have to use because your homes are well insulated, your offices and your industrial processes are efficient, and so you need to use less in total. And demand reduction obviously is an essential part of the shift to clean power, but it's really not in there. There is some stuff in the Clean Power Plan about shifting the peaks, which is important, but not about an overall reduction. Now, to give you some context for why that's important, a 2021 report found that the UK could halve its energy use while enhancing quality of life as well, through having warmer, more comfortable homes, for example, by insulating homes, a shift to more people using public transport and active travel, and healthier diets with a larger proportion of plant-based foods in them. That same report showed that without demand reduction, the electricity system by 2050 will need to be 4 times its current size. So given the challenge that we are facing in getting there, it really would do us a lot of favours to have a significant focus on demand reduction as well as just build. So why is that? Why is that not in there? Unfortunately, I think the most obvious conclusion is that it isn't as profitable. There is a bit of a pattern in that the kind of low carbon interventions that this government is most willing to back tends to be the ones that promise big financial returns for private investors. So it's going to be harder to scale things down politically than to scale things up, and unfortunately that leaves a gaping hole where demand reduction, but also things like nature-friendly farming and behaviour change comes in. And so that's a big area that I and my colleagues are working on. And of course the biggest thing that needs to be scaled down, rather than just focusing on scaling everything up, is oil and gas production. And I'm really worried that this government hasn't understood that and thinks that just doing the good stuff is good enough without stopping doing the bad stuff at the same time. I attempted to explain this to a colleague with an analogy, and I think she thought it was a bit tortured, but I'm going to give it a go. It feels to me like it's like you go to the doctor because you've got cholesterol and high blood pressure, and they say, well, what are you eating? And you say, well, I'm having a Big Mac every day for lunch. And they tell you to go away and eat healthier. And you come back and say, I'm now having a side salad with my Big Mac. But you're still eating the Big Mac. That feels like that's the approach that the government is taking, that they kind of think that just doing some more renewables is enough. So on oil and gas specifically, Labour's pledge to not grant any new oil and gas licences is a good step, but it is still not clear what their definition of new is, because the previous government, towards the end of its term, granted a load of oil and gas licences, both exploration ones, so the initial ones, and then consents for Rosebank and Jackdaw, some of the biggest remaining oil fields in the North Sea, to actually start extracting. Now, a Scottish court overruled those consents and said they were not granted legally and the applicant needs to come back and apply again. But this government has not been clear whether they count both those ones that got consents that have been overturned and the ones that got exploration licences but don't have the extraction consent yet, whether the government considers those ones as new, or whether it's going to allow 15 new oil and gas fields, but then not any new ones after that. And in terms of the carbon emissions, that makes a huge difference. The carbon emissions from burning the oil from Rosebank, which, and by the way, it is mostly oil, not gas, so it doesn't help our energy security at all. It'll all be sold on the global market. It won't reduce our energy prices or our energy exposure. But the carbon from burning all of that oil will wipe out all of the other carbon savings in the Clean Power Plan. it makes the whole of the rest of the work pointless. So, yeah, as you can tell, quite exercised about that. That's one of the other areas I'm keeping up pressure on the government. I'm also watching quite closely to see what they do on community energy, because that's another crucial part of the decarbonisation puzzle, where the government has said some good words, but it's not clear exactly what that's actually going to look like. So it's mentioned in the Clean Power Plan, but it's not clear how exactly it's going to work. And they've talked about, for example, communities that support, that host low carbon infrastructure like pylons might get some money off their energy bills, and I think that's a good idea. But I would like to see make it easier for communities to have a stake in the projects themselves, including a way for communities that don't have a lot of disposable income to have a stake in them in some way. Partly because bringing people with you and seeing what the benefits are is an important part of getting to net zero quickly. I'm a little bit worried that this government's approach of bulldozing over local concerns, with some of the changes that they're putting into the planning and infrastructure bill at the moment, is going to set people against them in a way that if they had done it a bit more carefully and slowly, it would have actually been quicker in the long run, because you're taking people with you. And again, I'm armed with a stat that helps make my point on this. So community energy, and I'm a almost founding member of Bristol Energy Co-op, so I've sort of got lived experience in this. But the opportunity to invest in and be part of and shape community energy projects increases the level of support for larger infrastructure projects as well. So polling for the think tank Commonwealth found that 62% of the public would support a community-owned renewable energy project in their area, compared to 40% for privately owned projects. But there's a sign that you can kind of link that in people's minds, and they can see that there is an opportunity for community involvement that has an even bigger impact. And it may be that some of this is on the way, because I know that the Clean Power Plan isn't the government's only planned work in this area. So I hope the government does know all this stuff. In particular, and obviously I say this as an engineer that used to work in renewable electricity, so I do care about that. But to reach our decarbonisation targets that the science demands, we need to reduce our usage in transport, heat and land use as well. Electricity is in many ways the lowest hanging fruit, and it's the part of the sector that, in part probably thanks to some of the people in this room, has already gone a fair way on the decarbonisation journey, and it's transport and heating that the emissions have remained stubbornly high. And so I'm just a little bit worried that this government is putting its investment and its attention into the thing that is kind of sorting itself out, and not into the bits that would really benefit from government investment. There is going to be a warm homes plan and a local power plan coming out at some point, but at the moment we don't know what's going to be in them. So I'm hopeful for these, but I would say hopeful, not relaxed at this stage, because we've seen that even before the election, Labour abandoned their previously flagship 28 billion climate pledge, and when you delve into what it is exactly that they were proposing to not do in order to abandon that pledge, it was some of this stuff around housing retrofit that would reduce our demand. And we've also seen that apparently the government think that expanding almost all of the airports in this country is compatible with our carbon targets, which obviously it isn't. So I am a little concerned that there perhaps isn't the understanding of the need to have decarbonisation running through all of the country's policies in the heads of everyone in the Cabinet, even if the Secretary of State, I think, has a reasonable grasp of it. So I guess that's part of the benefit of having some Greens and some engineers in Parliament. I'm far from the only engineer in there, by the way. There are quite a few others, including several that worked in renewables before, and it is definitely valuable in my experience. I found this as a councillor as well. Not that I'm arguing for a technocracy where everything's decided by engineers, but it's just good to have people from a variety of different backgrounds, because then you're less likely to make mistakes, frankly, because you're going to have people in the room who ask the question that nobody else would have thought of. the sort of stunning example I had of this when I was a newly elected councillor. We had a proposal to there was a decision that needed to be made between two different rail projects in the region, the Henbury Loop or the Henbury Spur. Basically, one would be a relatively long train loop with lots of stops, and because it was a loop, you could have trains going in both directions, so there would be a lot more public transport. One was just a spur that went out and back and only had a few stations. A cost-benefit analysis was done, and they showed that the spur was better value for money, but only by a bit. And so my colleague, Green Councillor, who's a physicist, said, "What's the error bar on that?" And the person giving the presentation did not understand the question. So, yeah, I mean, it was like, well, you know, if it's better value for money for that much, but the error bar is this, then how meaningful is that really? So that was a really early lesson that being there to ask the nerdy questions that other people aren't asking is probably a contribution I can make, and I will keep on doing so. And back to Parliament then, just to wrap up, you know, this 2030 target is tough, but the climate the climate science demands it, and the experts do say that it's achievable. And I see my role in a big way as putting pressure on government to make sure they don't forget about it, and holding their feet to the fire. Maybe not a real fire, maybe a solar powered one, on making sure that the transition is rapid, but also that puts workers and communities at the heart of decision making, making decisions with people rather than to them, and aligning all of the policies with our climate targets, not just the electricity ones.
Thank you, Carla. That was great. Thank you, everyone. So we're going to take some questions. Carla's asked if we could do 3 at a time, and then she's going to try and remember the first question, which is going to be remarkable. So can I take the first question up here, and then I'll look for some hands.
Thank you. Hi, Carla. Firstly, thanks so much. It's genuinely brilliant to see such enthusiasm for so many green policies. And I guess mine's less of a question, more of a request. As a vegan, one of the things I so rarely see is any kind of focus on the potential decarbonisation from food chain, from agriculture, from farming industry, and also the well-being for animals. I think it's one of those topics that it can get quite heated, but I never see it in the kind of in the policy discussions. Having spent a lot of my life in the civil service before coming to Durham, I know how slow and so how complex some of these decisions can be. But I think like 3% of mammals in the world live free, and the majority, very sadly, of pigs that are slaughtered for sausages are killed in gas chambers, and there's so many awful things that happen. And I think there's an awareness piece, and also you've got these benefits of decarbonisation and moving to a plant-based diet. So I guess my humble request is that you can be the champion for the animals everywhere, and keep looking out for them and for the decarbonisation opportunities this brings.
Thank you. We've got a question in the front. Remember, we're only going to probably do 2 rounds of 3 questions, so do jump in.
No, it's fine. You go ahead.
Yeah, so you mentioned the Clean Power Plan, and you mentioned a number of different technologies. What wasn't mentioned was deep geothermal. Durham and Cornwall have the best deep geothermal resource in the country. Cornwall have already drilled 1 well down 6 kilometres. Durham has, equal potential resource. How can governments, how can the Green Party help accelerate and scale up the investment that's needed for deep geothermal?
Great question. So one more question? Yeah, Mikey.
I totally take your point about Rosebank. I'm equally concerned about the burgeoning rise in the data centres, these huge data centres, which to me are going to use all the electricity that we're going to be generating through Clean Power 2030 and a lot more. Do you share that concern?
Cool, thank you. So I'll do those in order. Yes, I'm vegan as well, and so is Adrian and Zach, my co-leader and deputy leader of the party, so we agree. Did you see the media coverage of the Climate Change Committee's report, though?
Not a lot, no.
The front cover of most of the UK newspapers was government's going to ban you eating a kebab. This is the challenge, is that as soon as you go anywhere near talking about diets, there is a certain section of the population that calls you a Nazi. So it's really, really tricky.
No, I completely get it. It's one of those things where you feel like people take it as a personal attack on you if you say, have you thought about...
Yeah, exactly. So neither the Climate Change Committee, which is the government's official advisor on climate, nor the Green Party is saying everyone should be forced to be vegan overnight. But we are saying, and the science is saying, that the proportion of our diets averaged over the country needs to have less meat and dairy and more plant products in it. And that should be eminently doable. That will be better for biodiversity, it'll be better for efficient land use, because growing some crops to feed it to an animal and then killing the animal and eating the animal is, even if you don't care about the well-being of the animal, a hell of a lot less efficient than growing some lentils. So this is something we've done some work on. Adrian Ramsay, Green MP for Waveney Valley, and my co-leader, so while I lead on energy and net zero, he leads on nature and farming. So he's done a bit of work on this. He also used to be the CEO of the Centre for Alternative Technology in Machynlleth in Wales, and they produced the Zero Carbon 2030 report back in 2011, something like that, which at the time was quite groundbreaking in that it spoke explicitly about the change in land use needed, and it showed how you could get there. So yeah, I think it is important, but the messaging piece on that is so tricky. But on the plus side, the sort of range and quality and availability of vegan protein that is like tasty and available in all the supermarkets now does, I think, make that easier. But yeah, it's a really tricky one.
Thank you for being a continual champion for it. It's one of those things, I think, just from all angles, is a positive thing.
Yeah.
And honestly, it's so refreshing to hear, and just it's, you know, like you said, it's a challenging messaging piece, but it's a slow process.
Yeah. So one of the things that can be done, and apologies for putting you on the spot, people who work for the university, but is Durham signed up to the Plant-Based Universities programme? Because if not, that would be a great way to help. So that is a campaign running across the world. I'm myself, Adrian and Zach are signed up as supporters of it, because if, you know, again, it's not forcing everyone to be vegan, but it's saying in the cafe in this building. The DI is.
Well, we're not signed up to that, but we have our own policy that says we only serve vegetarian and vegan food. So
Brilliant.
it's a start.
Brilliant. And I believe our lunch shortly is as well. Great. Well, that's a start, because I think that serving people things that are tasty is part of the journey. On next question, deep geothermal. Yes, I agree. I mean, I couldn't cover all the technologies, but I agree. Yeah, there's lots of potential in the northeast and the southwest on that. In fact, back when we had MEPs in this country, the Green MEP for the southwest, Molly Scott-Cato, who I briefly worked for, she's an economist, and she commissioned a report that showed that the southwest could be self-sufficient in energy, because it's a particularly windy, wavy corner of the country and has that geothermal. The potential for rolling it out quickly is what I'm less sure about, and so I think that the bread and butter of our decarbonisation is still going to be onshore and offshore wind and solar, but that doesn't mean don't do geothermal. It just, I guess, means don't put all your eggs in that basket, and I am a little bit worried with this government, with their attitude to carbon capture and storage especially, that they are putting a few too many eggs in the technology will save us, we don't need to change what we're doing, rather than we've got the technology, shall we just roll it out a bit quicker? And yeah, given that wind and solar are at the stage where we can just crank them out now-ish. Sorry, apologies to anyone who is finding that is not the case, but relative to geothermal, we can. So yeah, it's one of those areas, though, where I absolutely support investment in like demonstrator projects, like the same with tidal. And I hope that that's the kind of project that Great British Energy will get involved in. So the government set up Great British Energy. That's something that I'm really supportive of in principle, but I did ask the Secretary of State some questions around the time it was announced about, which I didn't get a straight answer on, about what kind of projects they'll invest in and how big a stake they're likely to invest in. because I would like to see at least some of those projects be majority publicly owned, so that there can be a controlling share, rather than what I'm slightly afraid will be the case, which is that they just take a 5 or 10% stake in a load of different projects, de-risk private investment, and then it stays all in private hands, and we don't get to actually shape some of this innovation, really. So, bit of a wait and see on that one, but I have made my view clear. And finally, yes, I mean, short answer, yes, data centres and AI, it really feels like not many people are paying attention to the huge energy and water usage and the impacts. So, yeah, I really hope the government is going to catch up and do some regulation on that ASAP.
That's great. We've got time for 3 very short questions. I know Simone had one, and then I'm going to grab 2 others. I can see some hands. I've made my decision. Simone.
Thank you very much. I was interested in your comments about community energy. You were a bit critical about whether the government's approach is convincing. What do you see as the way forward and the potential for community-based energy?
So there was, let me just dig something out, because I had a particular useful quote from some professionals in this. 1 second. Give me the other questions and I'll have it by the time you...
One question in front.
You can probably hear me from here. Heat pumps and culture war. It feels like Nigel Farage suggests heat pumps don't work. How is the Green Party tackling that challenge?
Yeah.
One more question. Got a hand at the back. Right next to you then.
Thank you for the talk and the opportunity. I wanted to ask, you mentioned how transportation was another area where there are issues, and my understanding is with things like EVs you can get a certain saving in the operation, but there's still a lot of carbon associated with the manufacture, so we may need to be rethinking things like personal ownership of cars and so on. Do you have any thoughts and policies which can promote a greener transportation in the future?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, sorry, there's one more question.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's fine.
Front, yeah. The pink shirt here.
Thank you very much. I'm very interested in your point about kind of the technocratic elements of government and the importance of that in the kind of changing, mitigating the effects of climate change. But kind of people from different backgrounds, people in the humanities or social sciences, like what do you think skills they can bring to the table, and how do you kind of bring them on the journey where it's not just people with kind of like empirical knowledge about solving problems, and it's more the kind of a collective.
And does that include yourself?
Yes.
Right. So community energy, I've dug out the quote that I was looking for. So yes, a lot of the advocates for community energy have pointed out a particular problem, which is grid connection. So because there's a long wait for grid connection, the government's proposed decision-making process, rather than the first come first serve, which you have at the moment, where if one project is running behind schedule, then 15 other projects behind it in the queue can't connect even if they are ready. The government is proposing to let the ones that are more ready go first, but also be a designation between projects that are necessary, and the concern is that they're going to designate the big, entirely privately funded renewables projects as necessary and not the community energy projects, and because the private ones that are in the connections queue are actually enough to get us to net zero by 2030 on electricity, which is great, but it means that the community energy projects are just never going to get connected and start generating, which is maddening. So one of their specific asks, and we'll be looking into opportunities to propose this, it's a bit complicated for MPs from small parties in opposition and how you actually get things across the line, but we're looking now at what the levers are. So there's a specific call to make community energy projects categorised as necessary as well, so that we can have a mix of the big industrial ones and the community ones all coming forward at the same time. And also actually another thing is that the Clean Power Plan, there's an 8 gigawatt target for local and community energy projects, but the government is including in that large projects by local authorities. So there's a risk that actual co-ops get pushed off the table by ones run by large local authorities. So again, wanting to see a mix in there. Heat pumps, it's a pain in the bum. So I don't know if any of you have sort of looked at footage in the House of Commons, but the way the seating is laid out, our screens unfortunately have the Reform MPs sitting right behind us, muttering climate disinformation to each other while we're trying to concentrate on the debate. So it's quite maddening. Bluntly, Reform are disinformation merchants on a number of fronts. It's not just heat pumps; it's climate altogether, and immigration and lots of other things. I think if anyone had figured out the silver bullet for how to stop that disinformation taking hold, we would be doing it already. We are doing our best, but you have to remember that these guys are bankrolled by billionaires, because our political donation system in the UK is very unregulated. So money gets you airtime and gets you column inches, and it can be hard to counter that. And unfortunately, countering disinformation generally is a science and an art that nobody in the world has nailed, because, as the saying goes, a lie is halfway around the world before the truth has got its boots on. And saying, well, no, actually, that thing that isn't true, just reinforces the thing that isn't true in their head. It's like, don't think of a pink elephant. So, it's a really, really tricky one. So far, I've found, and I think I remember seeing some professional advice on this, that the best way of countering disinformation isn't to say, well, actually, that's not true. It's to talk about other benefits of the same thing. So it's to sort of take someone off that track of going down a conspiracy theory thing and talking about the jobs benefits, or talking about it giving you a warmer, more comfortable home, and not focusing on debates about an efficiency number. So that's the approach we take. Transport, I'm looking because I can't remember who it was that asked that question. There you are. Electric vehicles are not a panacea. They have a carbon footprint in making them. They have a human rights footprint in making them because of the mining of some of the rare earth metals. They still cause air pollution, because a surprising amount of air pollution is from brakes and tyre wear on the roads, not just from emissions out of the tailpipe. And they still cause congestion, and road traffic collisions. I corrected myself, because they are arguably, many of them, not accidents. They could be designed out by better systems. And again, this is another one where it's tricky, because you kind of go a bit too strident, and the Daily Mail says, Green Party wants to ban all cars. And no, of course, nobody is suggesting that. But if we want to get the benefits of decarbonising and of not causing ecological and human rights damage of mining lots of those metals and tackling air pollution and congestion, then just doing a one-to-one swap where every petrol and diesel car in the UK is replaced with an electric vehicle is not the one. Some of those need to be swapped for electric vehicles, but we also need a much better public transport system, much better walking and cycling infrastructure, so that those who can and want to travel using public transport and walking and cycling can. And I think it was the RAC did a survey a few years ago that showed that around 20% of people who drive to work every day would rather not. But the options aren't there. So it has to be about simultaneously, both with carrot and stick, mandating and making it easier to switch to electric vehicles, but also making it easier to switch to public transport, walking and cycling, by getting that infrastructure there. And I do support the government's bringing rail back into public ownership, but that's not the whole answer. And there needs to be investment, including in rural services, rural bus services especially, because it doesn't really matter who owns it if the bus routes aren't running. What was the... Yes, role for people that aren't scientists and engineers. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's really important. Because, as I've sort of implicitly said in several of my previous answers, the challenge is people's attitudes and the way things are communicated, and misinformation and the stories people tell, at least as much, if not more, than it is the science and the engineering. And humans are a storytelling species. That's how we form our identity. It's how we understand the past and the future. And so there is a really important role for people in the arts especially, I would say, but definitely humanities and social sciences as well, to help us understand and have a good vision for the future that we're going for. Because a lot, virtually all of the fiction that is set in the future is either set in an apocalyptic future, or it's an idealistic future where climate change doesn't exist and never has existed, and so it doesn't tell us how we solved it. I really, really want to see more TV and films and books that are set in a future that starts now, and where climate change was a crisis and then we solved it and things were good again after that. Because if people can't imagine that future, then they don't know how to aim for it. And that is so important, and not something that scientists and engineers are typically terribly good at. So I hope you can help.
Thank you. I'd like to say thank you so much, Carla, for a very wide-ranging and very informative talk today. It's really gratifying to hear that a Durham engineering graduate has such a broad and multidisciplinary approach to the challenges that we face. And as a fellow former engineer turned social scientist, I'm very glad for the final question as well. Thank you for bringing that in and for reinforcing that message which the Energy Institute is promoting, that we have to work together across disciplinaries, focuses and across professions and sectors to really tackle this really very, very challenging issue. So thank you very much. We have a small gift to thank you for coming today, and I'd like to invite you to give Carla another round of applause. Thank you. Just before we finish, I'd just like to let you know that our next public lecture will specifically be about social value and its role in the energy transition, and that will be in July. So if you've signed up to our newsletter, you will get some information about that, and if you haven't signed up, please do. So thank you very much for coming.